Recording in progress. We're gonna start that. Welcome. Hi. So we only have a few people in right now, but people will be joining in as we go. But want to get going right on time for everyone. As you all probably noticed, we're gonna be recording this session today, just so everyone here is aware. But hi everyone, and welcome or welcome back if you were able to join us last time. This is the Network for Youth Successes Power of Three Advocacy webinar series. My name is Gabby Schwartz, and I'm the policy coordinator here with the Network for Youth Success. And I'm joined here by my colleagues, Ali Leidy and Trudy Morgan. So thank you all so much for joining us today. Really happy to have you guys today during your lunchtime. So appreciate you coming. Again, for people who are joining right now, we are going to be recording this session. You should have gotten that notification, just so you are aware. I'd also like to know a little bit about who we have with us today joining us. So if you could take a minute to introduce yourself and where you're joining us from in the chat box, or feel free to unmute, honestly. I see June did, so if you'd like to.
Yeah, I'm June Muto. I'm the regional lead for the MOST here in Wayne County, which is maximizing out of school time. And I'm here for a review of this. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear June. And I see Leslie's introduced themselves in the chat as well. Yeah, waving hi. So thank you. Awesome. Okay. And if everyone wants to keep continuing to introduce themselves in the chat box and move along like that, that'd be awesome. So we just kind of know who's around. So Ali is going to be our moderator for today. So if you have any like individualized questions or like tech issues, like it's giving you problems, go ahead and shoot her a private message. I also do want to let everyone know that this training does not count for OCFS credit, just so that we're all aware. It's not one that counts for OCFS credit. Also, thank you, Madison, for introducing yourself as well. Hello, welcome. So if you have any general questions or questions about the content today, please feel free to put them in the chat box. I'm going to try to answer them as we go along and as they're relevant to the content, but if I don't get to something, then we'll be able to follow up afterwards, or we may have some time at the end to kind of talk through some questions that we don't necessarily get to. Cool. Okay, we're getting more people responding. I really appreciate it. We have some people from New York City and Rochester and Wayne County with June. So this is great. We have a few people from across the state. Awesome, thank you. So I'm gonna get us moving along into the content, and we're gonna have more chances to chat and discuss and talk. So today we're going to be discussing and practicing using storytelling as an advocacy tool. So advocacy is really effective in advocacy because it helps us to draw connections between you and the person you're advocating to in a memorable way. By the end of the session, we really hope that you'll understand the value of incorporating storytelling into your advocacy strategy, that you can develop an advocacy message through storytelling, and that you'll gain an understanding of how to effectively use data in storytelling. So we're going to talk a little about data as well. So before we begin, I want to take a quick minute to introduce who we are and what the Power of Three campaign is. So the Network for Youth Success is the statewide after-school network for New York, working with 49 other statewide after-school networks and the National After-School Alliance. We're committed to strengthening the capacity and commitment of communities, programs, and professionals to increase access to high-quality programs and services beyond the traditional classroom. We're also the state affiliate for the National After School Association and the New York State lead for the National Girls Collaborative Project, and also the backbone agency for the New York State Community Schools Network. And this webinar series is part of our Power of Three campaign, which is a public awareness campaign on the role, benefits, and impact of after school. The goal of this webinar series is to give you insight into the world of advocacy and to empower you to advocate on behalf of after-school summer and expanded learning programs, and also the families in your community. You can learn a little bit more about the Power of Three campaign on our webpage, which we're going to also share in the chat box. So here you go, dropping that link right now, so you can learn a little bit more. So I also want to do a really quick review about what advocacy and lobbying are. So this will be a refresher for folks that were able to join us in the first session, and just kind of a quick little introduction for people who are joining us today. So advocacy is the act of supporting something and often takes the form of generally educating or informing about a topic. So for example, telling people about the benefits of an after-school program for youth. Lobbying is an attempt to influence the government or a decision maker's action on an issue through oral or written communication. And in this case, when we're talking about decision makers, we're talking about individuals within government that have the power to make decisions about different issue areas. So if you want a little more information about advocacy and lobbying, or maybe like a general overview about the landscape of after school in New York, and how that relates to politics in New York, you can watch our recording of our first session, which was the After School Advocacy 101 session. There are timestamps in this video, so if there's something you already know a lot about, like maybe you know the people who are in power in New York State government, you're not really interested in that, you can skip that and go to exactly the stuff that you really want to learn about. So I'm going to drop that link in the chat for folks that were not able to join us last time. I see we have more people who have joined, so thank you so much for continuing to introduce yourself. For anyone that joined after I mentioned it, I was just asking for your name and like where you're from, kind of how people have modeled it in the chat already. So just so we kind of have a lay of like who we're talking to. Awesome. Thanks, Allie. So we're going to start today by talking about the importance of storytelling and giving you a framework to help you develop your own after-school story and advocacy. So we're going to start by reviewing who has a story to share about after school and talking about those folks. So after school summer and expanded learning programs are a far-reaching issue area, often intersecting between education, childcare, and youth development topics. This means that there are a lot of different individuals that may have had an experience with after school programs and a story to share about them. We've listed a few groups that we think of off the top of our heads that have some different stories and perspectives on after school. So as you can see on the slide, there are principals and teachers who might help design and run after-school programs in their buildings, or might work with after-school staff to align programming with in-class curriculum. We have parents and caregivers of youth that are in after-school programs. So for them, after school really gives their children a safe place to explore new skills with caring adults while they attend work. Youth can speak to the various programs and activities that they do in after school and what it means to them. As the recipients and the chief folks who are getting these services from after school programs, centering their stories is really imperative to understanding the impact that after school has on a community and to the youth themselves. Site directors and frontline staff, which I'm sure we have some here today, from the chat, I've seen that. They can usually talk about the experiences that they have with youth while noting the challenges that they might encounter in providing high quality programming with the current resources that are available to them. Finally, we have some community-based organizations that provide perspective about how current systems meant to support after-school programs are functioning as entities that implement these programs on the ground. Additionally, they're often able to provide insight into the viability of programming in a specific community and the specific supports that they need to continue providing that. So after running through just a few of those quick folks for you all, I want to pose a question back to you. So who else do you think is not included in this list that also would have a story to share about after school? So I'm going to put that in the chat as well so everyone can see it. But other people who might, the children, haha, yes. Thank you, Jennifer. I see that. If anyone would like to unmute and share one, that's also fine. Whatever your comfort is, it's totally all right. But just other folks that are not included in this list who have a story to share, who are impacted by after school, who have relevancy to it. Program coordinators, program directors, yep, definitely. Thank you. Okay, I like to give a little bit of time. Oh, see, okay, Jennifer is coming back in for more. So neighbors, we're in a community center, so our neighbors see the children and benefits of after school communities. So those are kind of tied together where it's not just the people receiving services that benefit from these programs, it's also the entire wide community, right? People who see the children and see the benefit that it brings and the value add. So it's definitely true, and we're going to talk about that as well. So I appreciate you both uplifting that, Jennifer and Roberto. Partnership agencies, yes, Jude. So other folks that might not work directly in after school, but provide additional like resources in other spaces. So maybe they do health related services and other things like that. Schools and community, yep, the schools across the board. So that includes, and those are the examples I quickly thought of. So, you have like school staff that are outside of teachers and principals. So like social workers in the schools, behavioral interventionalists, counselors, different folks do different things in the school that care about after school because they can connect with those programs in order to provide better services for youth. So what I really want to uplift, and what I think we're kind of uplifting here, is that yes, local hospitals and staff. Sorry, got excited about that one. So each group has a different perspective to share about the impact that after school plays for them. And by incorporating all of those perspectives, we're able to really create a fuller picture of the impact after school has on a community. So the way that I've outlined these perspectives and like we've talked about them is just like one facet, right? There's so many different ways to look at this and can be much wider than we've even talked about, because people are individuals and stories are varied, right? But this provides perspective for how each voice and story is needed to accurately portray the far reaches of after school in a community. So we really need like a collection of voices to show the full perspective of what after school can do. I also think it's really important to note outside of this as well that anyone can really have a story related to after school. And this kind of gets back to that neighbors comment and the community's comment that we had some folks bringing up in the chat. So I'm not personally a caretaker of a child in my life. I'm not a parent. However, I have children and youth in my life that I care really deeply about and have had positive experiences in after school or could benefit from a program. So even with that kind of far reach of like, I don't see it in my everyday, I'm still impacted by it. And I still have a story related to it because there are people in my life that I care about that are benefiting from it. So really, it's good to keep the perspective that nearly everyone can have a connection to after school, and that can be shared in advocacy spaces. So storytelling is really wide reaching, as we've mentioned. And at its core, it's about developing connections with people. So it's how we create connections in our personal lives, but it also seamlessly extends into advocacy spaces as we do work to build awareness in an issue area. Sharing your story presents an opportunity to connect with representatives and decision makers by showing them why after school is important to you and to understand their interests and focus. So let's build a connection and relationship with the decision maker that emphasizes your similarities and ideally positions you to work together to address challenges. Additionally, sharing your story with decision makers develops an empathetic connection between the both of you. By grounding the issue you're advocating for in stories, you center the conversation on people and a person-first approach that humanizes the issue and shows decision makers how supporting the issue can make substantive changes in someone's everyday life. By taking the time to build this emotional connection, it increases the likelihood that decision makers will champion your issue, Incorporating storytelling can also help with developing your public speaking skills, so it's a personal development thing too, especially in spaces where you're working to try to illustrate your personal experience or perspective. So as noted earlier, storytelling also highlights diverse experiences, which strengthens and deepens the understanding someone has of your issue and kind of everywhere it touches. So uplifting diverse perspectives and voices shows the multifaceted nature of after school and the various complex ways it impacts people's lives. We do want to make sure to note, though, that it's really important to default to anonymity and receiving explicit consent to share other people's stories in a public space. A person's story is by nature very, very personal to them and should be respected as such, especially in the case of youth and families that participate in your program. So always making sure to ask for permission or make sure that they're aware that there's something you might want to share in a public space is best practice through and through. It's respectful. So to craft an effective story to use in advocacy, we're going to use a model called the Self, Us, Now model, which is adapted from the works of Marshall Gantz of Harvard University. So in the chat box, I'm going to drop a link to the article that he wrote. Here you go. It's publicly available. And this is something that we've adapted in the after school space in order to kind of build out this advocacy strategy. So the Self, Us, Now public narrative model is really designed to help you effectively develop your story in an advocacy context. So namely, it's to convince others to join you in advocating in an issue. It's a structure that begins with the personal and then builds outward toward a wider audience and finishes with a call to action. So the self part of the model has the advocate expressing individual values and experiences that motivate them to care about an issue. The us portion connects shared values and experiences that motivate us as a community to care about an issue. And the now is a call to action in response to the challenge or threat that the shared value or experience. This model helps advocates focus their story in a concise, direct way to present their personal experience that motivates the listener to act. We're going to take a minute now to walk through an example of how this model is used in an after-school context from the perspective of a parent. So we're going to pull it up. It's going to have all the words on the slide. I'm going to read along with it so you guys kind of see how this functions. And I'm going to pause a few times to kind of explain maybe some points around what's happening in the model as we're going through it. I'm going to take a drink of water before I start because it's a lot of words. All right, I'm ready to go. So just before I head out to pick up my 7-year-old son, Johnny, from school, I get a call from my supervisor requesting that I cover for another colleague. If I answer the call, all I have is 20 minutes to make new arrangements with friends to see who can care for him while I go to work. I'm a nurse and my job is on call. My husband is a truck driver who spends a good amount of time on the road. I'm already feeling guilty because this is not the first time that I've been put in this position. In a short amount of time, I have to choose between work and my child. So in this example, the parent expresses their connection to the issue, namely an experience where they're left without a safe place for their child to go while they work. This experience is what motivates them to care about increasing access to after school. So we're framing that right now in the personal. So I'm going to continue on. I know that many working families, especially parents in on-call jobs like mine, often have to navigate this dilemma as well. Without having the support and confidence that our kids can be safely cared for, many families are forced to stay home to take care of their kids. This is an unfair position to be in. Many working parents in this community need after-school programs as a support to continue to work. This is why maintaining high-quality after-school programs is critical. So as we continue on, the speaker identifies themselves with other working families within their community that are often asked to choose between work and their children. This broadens the challenge and expresses that this parent situation is not only theirs, but rather a community-wide issue that after-school programs can address. So parents need to know that their kids are safe and want them to have fun opportunities to learn and try new things, as well as time for physical activity, play, and socializing. After-school provides all of these things. Finding a safe place for my Johnny to go, to be cared for while I care for others, has made a difference for our family. And I know that this is also true for those working parents that benefit from after school. After school programs help parents balance work and life, and we cannot afford to lose them. With your voice, you can help our decision makers understand that access to these programs is important to us. So in the final part of this parent story, they tie their situation to a solution, which is access to after school programs, and encourages other working parents and caregivers to join in their voice to support after school to their decision makers. I'm going to pause because that was a lot of stuff. I read the whole story. So I'm going to pause for a minute before we move into our next activity and just do a general ask of if anyone has any questions or thoughts about the Self Us Now model and how it kind of works and what it looks like. So again, dropping the question in the chat box as well so people can read it and have it to refer to. And I'm going to wait. See a like also. Thank you, Roberto. Ooh, the length on the testimonials. So this is kind of varied. It's going to depend on the environment you're in and who you're speaking with. So if you're in a meeting with a legislator and it's like you got 15 minutes to sit down and talk, you're going to want to kind of abridge the space and make sure you're kind of moving through these points relatively quickly. Whereas like maybe if you're at say like a rally event and you're a speaker at the event, you're trying to tell your story about what's going on, you might have a little more time to kind of flesh it out, talk about it. So I know that's not the most satisfying answer in the world, but it kind of depends on the context of the situation you're in. Though I will say being clear and direct and kind of moving through these points with relative speed, so you're not kind of moving along very slowly, would be probably ideal. So in my mind, like an under 5 minute, like a 5 minute or under kind of timing is probably a good to aim for, and then it can be abridged or maybe expanded upon depending on the audience you're speaking with, if that's helpful. That's my personal perspective. If there's not a perfect answer, I wish I could say like 5.5 minutes or 10.5 minutes and move along, but I think it varies a little bit depending on your audience. Thank you for asking. Oh, awesome. I'm wonderful. I'm glad it helped. Okay, so I'm gonna move us along, and then if anyone has any further questions about this, there's gonna be opportunities later as well, and we'll have some opportunities at the end. So we can continue on. So I wanted to ask you guys if you wanted questions, because as you can see on the slide, we're now going to do a breakout, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to practice this on your own. So what we're going to do is we really want you to draw your connection to after school. So whether that's as an after school professional in your job, or maybe you're a former participant, we will share the worksheet in the chat. You're ahead of us. I'm going to share it in a moment. Don't worry. So just pick a perspective that you are. So it could be in your job. It could be maybe you're a parent or caregiver. Maybe you're someone who has a youth in your life that benefits from after school. Maybe you're a former participant of after school programs and you want to talk about that experience. So like I said, we're going to put you into breakout rooms for about 15 minutes. During that time, we really encourage you to take some minutes to fill out the worksheet that we're going to share shortly. And then share with your group members, and maybe, totally fine that your enthusiasm. I'm happy to hear it. So we're going to give you a moment to fill it out and then share with your work group members. Even if you're just sharing, maybe you're sharing your stories, or you could just workshop and think through maybe some things that were a little bit challenging. Kind of a moment to work on your own, and then a moment to work together. So let me share it now. Here you go. And that worksheet also has at the bottom the example that we shared, so you can refer back to that as well. So it's kind of all in one space. So this version is not a shared version. You can view it. You should be able to view it. If anyone can't, please let us know and we'll work on it. To edit the document, because we don't want everyone editing over each other, what you're going to do is download the document onto your computer. So you can do that by clicking, if you're not sure how to download, you go to the top left, you click File, and then down, click Download. And then if you usually download it as a Microsoft Word doc, click Microsoft Word doc. And it should download onto your computer and allow you to edit it right there. Whatever way works best for you, though, we encourage you to do, right? Does anyone have questions? I'm going to pause one more time before we try to break you all out for 15 minutes and all that good stuff. Okay. Pause for a little bit. If anyone has anything, please unmute, send something in the chat. If it's a little unclear. We also, when you come back, just be sure to prepare to share a little bit about your observations. So like, you don't necessarily have to tell your whole story. We're not going to ask you to do that at all, but we're, what this experience was like, what you observed while doing it, kind of what it felt like to do the experience. Awesome. Okay, so let's see. We're going to break you out into breakouts now. Allie, do you have that ready to roll?
Yeah, for 15 minutes.
Yep, 15 minutes, and about 3 to 4 people, depending on how many folks we have in the room right now.
Great. All right. I will open them now.
Paused it. We're back. So welcome back. I hope that was good for everyone. I hope that was a beneficial kind of experience. I am going to take a minute, like I said before we did the breakouts, and ask you all a question. So what was the experience like for you? What kind of observations did you have? Just any kind of like reflection on kind of trying to create your own story, craft that. The questions are in the chat as well, as per usual, so you can read them in the chat, read them on the slide, or again, what was the experience like for you, or what observations do you have after doing this? And feel free to unmute, put in the chat box, whichever you're comfortable with.
I'll share. My name is Louie. I'm the program coordinator for Afterschool at the YWCA in White Plains. The experience for me, it's actually the network, New York State Network for Success has been amazing, just so you know, because I love the fact that you guys focus on after school, because that's been a really hard space for me to find other comrades essentially that are doing the same work as me, because it's such a niche of a space for childcare and for the complement to school. So it's been it's given me a lot of optimism to see other professionals that are interested in this space, that when you're by yourself, you feel like it's dwindling and you don't know where to go. To hear other people's feedback in it and hear the benefits. Two of the members from my breakout room were alums for after school, so they had benefits as children, and now they're working as adults doing it, which to me speaks to the value of it in itself and the longevity of how it's been benefiting people for decades, and we don't really talk about it, or it's not really formalized at this moment just yet.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So kind of what I'm hearing from what Lou just said, so thank you for sharing, is like that connection that you're drawing with other people. So even like talking about other people's stories is a really good way to connect, but also finding that kind of group or that space to belong in, and seeing how after school really is further reaching than I think people assume it is. That a lot of people have that experience in it, and also that it is a very impactful experience. So it's not just like an experience that they had and then kind of forgot about it. You have folks who were in programs and decided to work in them later because they were impactful in their lives. And I think that's a common thing that you hear from people, right? It's a realm, it's a workspace of passion, right? People do it because they care. And those stories of like why you care and what brought you to this space and why you continue to do the work is a really good space to start in order to build that connection and kind of show like what this really is and how it works, and like to get that visibility that might be a little bit lacking in some spaces, and make sure that there's that awareness, right? So that's really helpful. Thank you. Yeah, from hearing what other folks were talking about. I also see June has shared in the chat, so need to take the time to write it down and wordsmith to make it more clear. Yeah, so this, I'm going to share this as well. This takes practice. It takes time. I gave you guys 15 minutes to try to do the worksheet after just introducing it to you, and then to share with folks you don't know. I recognize that that is kind of a tall ask to ask people who have never met before to kind of do that, and especially sometimes telling a story can be vulnerable and you're not sure what to include and what to not. So I recognize that, so I really appreciate it, and it is going to take some time to kind of narrow this down and focus it up and figure out kind of where it needs to be, what it needs to look like. So want to recognize that June was the MVP in our room. I'm so happy to hear that. June is awesome. We work with June a lot, so that's like the shout out for June. So thank you, Roberto, for acknowledging that as well. Yeah, awesome. Okay, I'm going to move us along a little bit, but if anyone has other observations, you want to just kind of chat about it, like, please feel free, and we can try to circle back later or connect with it about it later. So hope that was helpful. And as I mentioned before, this is really continue to use that worksheet to like narrow it down and really just focus it up and like workshop it, right? Maybe you present your story and it doesn't feel like it worked as well as you hope, and you kind of go back to the drawing board and you maybe tweak it a little bit. That's kind of the intention, right? Is always improving. So we're going to transition slightly and talk a little bit about how to effectively incorporate data into your storytelling. So taking that story and putting data into it and making it work for you. So data is a really useful tool for expressing the urgency, need, and legitimacy of the issue that you're advocating for. However, it is a tool that's best used sparingly and with intentionality. So adding data can be a really powerful strategy for illustrating the scope of your challenge that your programs face or the impact that it makes in your community. We have many, many different types of data that we can use that are relevant to after-school programs. These can be quantitative, so those would be like numerical pieces of data, such as the number of students you serve, the number of students on a wait list for your program, or the number of maybe like healthy snacks that you served in a day or in a month or in a year during program. Alternatively, data can also be qualitative in nature, so it can be descriptive or not capturable by numbers. So this can look like testimonials from family or youth in your program. It can be the type of programming that you provide, or it can be the types of partnerships that the after-school program has, so those partnerships that you cultivate and develop. Data can also be much further reaching than the typical quantitative data that we think about, and it can really be used to add perspective to the point that you're making. So it's really important to select the data you choose with your audience in mind as well. So ask yourself what you know about your audience and the type of data that might motivate them into action. For example, representatives will be interested in data points that help explain the existing circumstances in their district, such as the number of youth on a wait list for after school in their district, or testimonials from families in their district about the impact of after school in their lives. Understanding your audience and what would motivate them to act is an important component to choosing relevant data points to discuss with them. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a minute to watch a video. This one has videos too. And we're going to see where the speaker incorporates data into a story that they're telling about a problem they identified by looking at open source data. So while we watch, I'm going to ask you to consider what data points the speaker used and how the speaker used that data to identify a problem and inform his advocacy. So kind of the 2 points is, what data points did he talk about and how did he use them to identify a problem and then work in advocacy? And we're going to get that up in just a minute.
I'm working on it. And my favorite was this. I mapped fire hydrants in New York City. And these aren't just any fire hydrants. These are the fire hydrants mapped by the amount of parking ticket revenue they're creating. So these are the top 250 culprits in New York City. First, on the Upper East Side, watch out. The 19th precinct will ticket you no matter where you park for a hydrant, apparently. But more interesting were these 2 hydrants that were down on the Lower East Side. And they were generating $55,000 a year in tickets. 2 hydrants, $55,000 for like 5 or 6 years. So finally, the data's public. I had a look. And when I went to figure out what was happening, it turns out that there's basically a hydrant and then what looks kind of like a bike lane and then a parking spot. So you go in and you're like, I'm not in front of the curb or the hydrant. There's a bike lane between us. Well, it turns out that while the DOT painted a parking spot, the NYPD disagreed. And so they would ticket the spot for years and years. And this is actually a shot from the Google Street View car going by, and it caught the ticket, which I really appreciated. Really appreciated. So I wrote about that, and I heard from the city again. While the DOT has not received any complaints about this location, we will review the roadway markings and make any appropriate alterations. That's an action statement. We're getting better. So I thought to myself, well, you know, government, I'm going to keep trying to make an impact. And suddenly, they repainted the spot. Yeah, impact. So somebody's listening. This is great. So, you know, you can look at your data and you can have an impact. Sometimes maybe your message isn't going to get through. But for each of these things where I know a statement was made, I know that I've changed at least some thinking in these agencies, that somebody is now thinking about this thing. So I consider those to be making impact as well. And if you think, and to do that, once again, I think you really need to think about some of the things about storytelling.
Okay. Thank you so much, Trudy, for sharing that, sharing the screen and everything and taking care of that. So as you guys can see, yeah, little story about how he used data to impact. I'm going to stop those questions I asked. You know, let's see, like, what kind of data points did he use? How did he identify a problem using that data? Does anyone have any thoughts, feelings, reactions?
You looked at tickets, and then I identified tickets where they were a lot, and wanted to know why, and sought out a solution to it.
Yeah, it's pretty, June she gave it in the most straightforward, simple way. He looked at the number of tickets that were given at a fire, where the fire hydrants are, the number of tickets, the amount of revenue, which is another data point, to identify what the issue was, which was a miscommunication between agencies, right? And then communicated in order to get that solved. So yeah, I'm gonna pop us along, but I am also going to share the full video in the chat. He shares other stories and information. Obviously, you could kind of tell we picked a little spot to give you guys an example, but if you're interested in the video, there's a link to it as well. So what we're going to do now with our last 10 minutes, so we're going to move through this, I'm going to get us through, is to talk about how data can be incorporated into a story using that self, us, now model example from earlier. So right here, I've highlighted data points that have been incorporated into the story, and as we move through, you're going to see these. So I'm going to read through this again with those data points included, all right? So again, we're reiterating the same story, but with data. So just before I head out to pick up my 7-year-old son, Johnny, from school, I get a call from my supervisor requesting that I cover for another colleague. Should I answer the call, all I have is 20 minutes to make new arrangements with friends to see who can care for him while I go to work. I am a nurse, and my job is on call. My husband is a truck driver who spends 50 hours a week on the road. I'm already feeling guilty because this is not the first time I've been put in this position. In a short amount of time, I have to choose between work and my child. I know that many working families, who represent over 80% of US families, often have to navigate this dilemma as well. Without having the support and confidence that our kids can be safely cared for, many families are forced to stay home to take care of their kids. This is an unfair position to be in. Many working parents in this community need after-school programs as a support to continue to work. Despite this need, for every child in an after-school program in New York, 4 are waiting to get in. This is why maintaining high-quality after-school programs is critical. Parents need to know that their kids are safe and want them to have fun opportunities to learn and try new things. At our local after-school program, Johnny can develop his skills in STEAM through robotics and music programs offered. Finding a safe space for my Johnny to be cared for 12 hours a week while I care for others has made a difference for our family. And I know that this is also true for those working parents and caregivers that benefit from after school. 94% are satisfied with their child's after-school program. After-school programs help parents balance work and life, and we cannot afford to lose them. With your voice, you can help our decision makers understand that access to these programs is important to us. So overall, this data served the purpose of giving the listener a fuller perspective about the situation the speaker is in, widens the focus of the issue, and fortifies the role of after school as a strong solution to the problem of limited access to childcare options. So I am going to move us through. I know it's pretty quick, but I hope it helped illustrate a little bit further and kind of how you can use that data in an example with the example that we used. I'm going to move along into the next part and talk about some tips that we have for storytelling. So when adding data to your story or presenting data in general, we have some important tips to keep in mind. So first, be sure to be brief with the data points that you share. Focusing heavily on data verbally is often really disengaging and can cause the audience to tune out. It is more impactful to focus on a few well-placed data points that strongly support the point that you're trying to make. In place of sharing all of the data verbally in a meeting with a decision maker, you can bring materials with more detailed information to leave with them and offer to follow up with further information as well. Following up is especially relevant if they ask you a question you don't have an immediate answer to related to data. As we touched on earlier, understanding your audience and the type of data that they want to hear is imperative. However, it's also important to consider the level of data needed to make your case. Namely, will your audience be interested in local data, state data, or national level? It can be useful to consider the level of government that they make decisions in specifically to guide you. Oftentimes, national level data will not be as convincing for state level decision makers, and state level data will be less relevant to local decision makers. However, if you're advocating to a representative of your community specifically, for example, a state senator that has your after-school program in their district, it can be very beneficial to share what is happening on the ground in their district to allow them to champion your needs as your representative. Data is really varied and can provide very useful information and context for decision makers. And if used intentionally, it can strengthen your story by exemplifying the scope of the challenge you face and the effectiveness of the solution that you provide. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. And hold on, don't leave quite yet. I'm going to share some reminders, resources, and pieces of information that'll be helpful for you. So please save the date for January 30th for our After-School Advocacy Day. We'll be convening at the state capitol in Albany to meet with legislators and their staff to advocate for after-school programs in the state budget. Registration opens next Wednesday, so be on the lookout. It's on September 27th. We also encourage you to join us for the next session in this series, Activating After-School Advocates, Engaging Youth, Family, and Media on October 3rd. So at the next session, we're going to have people, individuals who have experience in engaging youth and families in advocacy efforts, including preparing to bring them to Advocacy Day events, to come in, share their tips, experience, and knowledge. Lastly, Lights On After School is on October 26th, so you can plan an event if you haven't already at your program and invite decision makers to join in the celebration. Be sure if you are planning one to register your event at the After School Alliance's website, or if you are not planning one yet, you can go to their website also to receive ideas. So here are the links, the registration for the next session, as well as Lights On. So with that, the last piece, to keep up to date with all of the network's advocacy activities and to be involved, please sign up for the Power of 3 listserv. So here is that as well. That's where we send all of our information about being involved in advocacy. There's also some resource lists that you can refer to. So there's the, I created one for this webinar series specifically. It just has resources related to this webinar series. But we also have a resource link for the network that has all of the resources for the network as an organization as well. So if you're interested. With that, You have 5 minutes remaining. I'm gonna stop talking and I'm gonna give everyone a moment. If you have a question or a comment or something, I'm gonna use this last little bit of time to answer those if there are any kind of lingering in the space. And if not, you're free to go. I really appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much. Thank you, Madison. I'm happy to do this and I'm glad to have you all here. I'm gonna pause. I'm gonna stop our recording actually, because